Unexplained Truth, the show where we go into some of the mysteries, anomalies, and the dirty underbelly of the world around us. I'm your host, Paul, and joining us this week, we have Joaquin Flores, who's a writer on, what can we say, all matters geopolitics and Eurasian. Joaquin, are you there?
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, fine. Thanks for coming. And along for the ride is my friend Jerry. Jerry, are you there?
I am here, and it's nice to talk to you again, Joaquin.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, Joaquin, it's a busy time in the world. Lots going on, and there you are in Europe, which seems to be where a lot of the action is. I guess you've said that that's why you moved to Europe. You kind of wanted to see it unfold, so I think it's like a Chinese curse. You're getting your wish.
Yeah, it's all my dreams are coming true.
Yeah, well, I hope I hope the artillery is still out of range and all that.
Yeah,
but that's another part of European history that we can skip over for the time being. I tell you what, the big news, of course, lately is the Greek elections and Syriza, the coalition of the left, winning there. And who are they and what are they doing? Why don't you give us your thoughts on what's going on in Greece? And, of course, the Germanically, Teutonically bankster response to all this.
Oh, goodness. I mean, you have, 5 or 6 years of a readjustment policy which doesn't make any sense. And it's, really just designed not to do anything corrective for Greece. But it was meant to create basically just a fire sale type situation where European and German bankers could come in and purchase assets at a fraction of the cost, and then basically talk their book, but basically speak a game of things going to improve. And they monetize the assets that they purchased at rock bottom prices. We're talking, cents on the dollar. And so they had no interest at all in seeing things turn around. Meanwhile, this isn't like virtual reality. I mean, these are millions and millions of human beings who have seen their lives destroyed and had to take out second mortgages where they rent and they go to the market and there's price inflation, and you have 25, 27% official unemployment, which is something probably closer to 40% unemployment. You have youth unemployment over officially 50%, which probably means more like 80%. And this is a situation that's ripe for something really to go down big. And I think we're starting to see some of the results of that now.
Yeah. But, I have a kind of a higher level question in this. Let's say 15 years ago, I think most Europeans supported the EU or in general had a favorable view. And I don't think that's the case now. And in some countries, it's probably like, let's say in Greece, overwhelmingly, kind of getting nasty around the edges. Why do you think the EU has become so, I don't know if you say unpopular, but in a sense, it's more than that. It's in your face about what they're doing. What do you think is going on? Why are they doing that?
Well, that's 3 questions. The whole EU model was very different from the US model. And the EU, in short, is similar to the U.S. in that it is a speculative-based economy, which of course is based in finance capitalism, which is really kind of like non-productive end of capitalism. It's basically saying that in the future something's going to be worth more, so we can borrow or we can charge you for something in the present for something in the future, and ends up building like a Ponzi scheme, right? Like a pyramid scheme. But what the product is that the EU is going to continue to grow and grow. And it didn't really require that it grew, although it did on a certain level require it. But they could talk the game of it growing, and then the speculative bubbles that they could build out of the potential growth sectors in various economies and other places that they were talking about growing into, would create value today in their portfolios. So that's how basically the whole model was on growth. So they had to expand into the Balkans. They had to talk about Turkey becoming closer and closer, eventually becoming maybe even a Eurozone country. Israel, at one point, people may recall, was a candidate. I mean, really, there was even talk for a short time in 1997 or 1998, would Russia join the EU? And these are all things that were, published in mainstream financial newspapers and magazines and reports. People who were investors, who weren't, say, investing in large groups, but as individuals who, were intelligent enough to, read and analyze world events, would get this and say, oh, it seems likely enough, and they would make a decision. So that was how the model of the EU was built, and there's only so much of the world that one can reasonably call Europe. I mean, okay, let's say that it is, Russia all the way up to the Urals, and let's say that it's, I don't know, Turkey or half of Turkey, the Anatolian Greek part of Turkey, and possibly North Africa. I mean, there's a concept of Europe. There's only so far you can go calling it the European Union, but the whole concept.
Well, maybe it can be like NATO. You can start inviting New Zealand in or something.
Right. I mean, it's right because it could be anything. Right. And I think there's some of that thinking too.
But I know what you're saying on the economic side, but
Right.
It's not just economic. I mean, they have taken bureaucratic approaches that are petty and dictatorial.
Well,
they aren't about money in a normal sense. They're just evil and abusive, and I just kind of don't quite get why they haven't been more subtle about restraining their inner Hitler, so to speak, with all apologies to Hitler fans. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Your original question is connected to that, and it was a few points. I'd like to try to sort of tackle through them in the next 3 minutes.
Sure.
We look at basically what happened is that, so the EU model was basically built on how we described it. Yes, we've observed that the way they're making decisions and the sort of, if we could say the culture in Brussels is a certain way that you've just aptly described. And it's very much like when people watch, big Hollywood films, period pieces that are set in the 18th and 19th century, and you have these European court bureaucrats, these sniveling little conniving, evil guys, and it's like a certain strange culture that was developed. These people are entirely disconnected from the lives of everyday people. And this is a point of pride, and this is a sign of a collapsing or sick civilization. Of course, the author Toynbee wrote about different types of civilizations and ones that were failed and abortive. And in failed civilizations, he describes where, in fact, you had this type of scenario where the ruling elite was not capable of managing because they had a culture which actually put them, they just had completely the wrong ideas. And it seems strange to think, because we have such a normally a materialist view of history, and we think that if things fail, it's because the mechanisms weren't in place, or but it can be the wrong ideas. And then when your question about what people have responded and the resistance, or why people are not in love with the euro anymore, where they were 15 years ago, let's say, or at least they tolerated it. Even at the time the euro was introduced, many countries saw their buying power cut in half. But the ECB changed the rules of lending, and so similar way to the U.S., while buying power was cut in half, credit lines were loosened up, and more people had credit cards. So a lot of the consumer spending habits weren't greatly changed, at least for those who weren't too close to the bottom where they couldn't qualify for credit lines. And so, but I think there's been actually a paradigmatic shift, Paul, where now you can see that actually among people who are at least even just fairly interested in the world have so much more access. And I think that economic literacy has improved. And I think this is actually a good sign. I don't want to sound too optimistic, but I think, there was a time when people, only people that could have a conversation about asset bubbles and credit default swaps and fractional reserve banking and the difference between a private or public central bank were, people who had gone to business school for 5 or 6 years and had worked in Wall Street. And now these are terms and concepts that, are currency. They're commonplace words and terms that people are understanding and starting to grasp and interpreting and using them in their understanding of the world. We're moving away from a sort of a postmodern, or we're moving into a different kind of postmodern, but we're moving away from a type of way of understanding politics and economics that's based on ideology in the sense of broad feelings of left and right. And people are actually saying, like, who are the names of the people that own the bank? Who are these people? Where do they come from? And how is it that that money works? Is money is exogenous or endogenous? Is it, where does money come from? And why is it being spent this way? Why, when I put, $1 in the bank, does the bank print $1,000 from it? Those are the things I think that, have changed people's attitudes towards the EU, of course, besides the real material factors where their own quality of life has been decreasing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, clearly elites get out of touch. That's happened countless times around the world throughout history. But this has really happened quickly. The EU hardly got any power before all of a sudden it became totally out of touch.
Right. I mean, they put everything on Greece, and I think that's, there are people. This is, gets back to Greek theory of power, and you can dig back into student of Socrates, was a peer of Plato, named Xenophon, and he wrote, as we've probably talked about before, Hero the Tyrant, or Tyrannicus Hero, and it really explores the nature of power and what it means to rule. And it's I think what has happened is that in the post-World War II discourse, the entire post-World War II order in the West was justified on a critique of power, being, say, Hitler's power. And then, of course, the Cold War was justified based on a critique of power, being Stalin's power. And the idea basically that power corrupts, and absolute, Lord Acton's axiom about the tendency of power to corrupt and corrupt absolutely when held absolutely. So it tends to basically create a very, I want to say, stupid and self-fulfilling cycle, because it turns good people off from assuming roles of power, because there are good people. Most people are good people. I'd say only, 1 to 5% of people are genetic sociopaths. And if they can generate a sociopathic culture, it can infect maybe another 10 or 15% of the population. But, that's still, 8 or 9 out of people, out of 10, in a room who are genuinely good people, who would actually, they may not be rocket scientists, but faced with 2 or 3 decisions, they would pick the one that was both the bright one and the morally sound one, okay? But what has happened is actually a sort of leftist discourse about power has created a corporatist power dynamic, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, I think what you have with the EU is an extremist, what can we say, an extremism of the center. How's that? In other words,
right. Well,
the radical left and the radical right, to me, are actually the moderates.
They are the moderates.
The extremism is what the EU wants.
Right.
This is very funny to see this happen. Well, I tell you what, why don't we could go on forever about the EU, but how about the specifics of what's happening in Greece? What do you see with Syriza? Are you cautiously optimistic, or what do you think?
I'm cautiously optimistic. You know, to cut to the chase, it's not going to be hinged too much on Syriza's attitude with the EU. So all that is posturing, or most of that is posturing, things that we see happen on TV between the Greek finance minister and representatives of the Troika is theatrics. And statements made by Syriza are obviously meant to be consumed by the masses. So, it's hay, it's wheat, So it's, the real underlying thing that's going to matter is actually to what extent is the Greek military security, intelligence networks, able to have several complex programs running simultaneously, which allows Greeks to make, to make sovereign decisions. That's really what it's about. It's not, if you look at the economic platform of Syriza, answer's not going to be there. That was designed to attract moderates and not to scare off the EU. You don't really want to look too much at the easy to research relationships, like, say, the extent to which, George Soros has funded this or that program, or, parallel grant network alongside the European Trade Union Commission that has influenced the ranks of the left or civil society, organized labor in Greece to make, all that is sort of important, right? But it doesn't really get to the real issue. The real issue is Greece acting as a transmission belt or a conveyor belt that doesn't play a polarizing role that is going to separate itself from Europe, but rather what we will see is, if there's going to be a solution for Greece, is the extent to which Greece can both maintain itself within Europe, but represent as well the multipolar and, say, Eurasianist thread, which seeks to unhinge Europe from being a primarily NATO-dominated economic union.
Well, obviously, in terms of the safety of the leadership and all that of the party, it depends on the military and whatever. But I guess I have a question. I would say that Syriza has had relatively good PR.
Yeah.
Or something in the West. And this would be the biggest thing that concerns me. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, that could be a Trojan horse. Many things are put off a certain way. See, the thing is, we have to remember that in Russian policy, going back for 10 years, the parties in, say, Central and Eastern Europe that Russians have been supporting in EU have been Eurosceptic parties like Syriza, but they're not, trying to file documents or build a coalition to exit the EU. They're channeling Euroscepticism to create like a bridge with Eurasia, but they can't do that unless they're in the EU. They have to because the transformation of the EU, not that it's going to happen, but I'm just explaining what the strategy has been. If it's going to unhinge itself from being controlled by, say, Wall Street and the City of London, then they would need to be members of the EU and use that position to promote continental integration as opposed to transatlantic integration. So
okay, but if that's the case, then those strategists in the City of London or wherever, Wall Street, would be aware of Russia's strategy, and they might
maybe not. That's a question of intelligence monitoring. That's why the first thing I thought is to basically, it depends on the degree to which Greece has been able to have these kind of high-level contacts through intelligence, and to the extent that they were able to send mixed signals, confuse things when you have double and triple agents. And see, as we've explained before on your show, is that an agent can explain their work easily as being a double agent, and a triple agent can explain their work easily as being a double agent, and that's just how it works. So you can't, and the very same signs, for example, that Syriza sent to Europe, and all of the way that, all the reasons that a person, let's say, who was really pessimistic about Syriza, say, person who shared, let's say, our opinions about how things should be, but let's say they were really pessimistic about Syriza, it's because they've seen all the things actually that were intended to be seen at a certain level, which is deep enough to seem credible, and those are the things that EU folks were looking at. So the extent to which Soros had influence on Syriza, the things that they've moderated in their platform, they, for example, Syriza has said that they support probably the most disastrous thing that the EU could do, actually, which is quantitative easing, which is exactly, connected to the transatlantic trade partnership, and that's actually what Syriza says that they support. I mean, we're talking about quantitative easing, which I think they announced that they had full green light to do on January 25th or 6th.
Yeah. Well, certainly go ahead.
No, well, so they put out all the signs that they were, because, the thing is, you have to get right, like, the whole history of social democracy in Europe, and I'm talking about reformism, where they might wave red flags and they might, appeal to the militant ranks of trade unions and disaffected layers of society and give them a socialist or pseudo-communist message. But Euro-communism in Europe has always been used that way. It's always been penetrated. The trade unions have always been penetrated by agents of the ruling class. They've always redirected and re-steered the aspirations of say, the voters who voted for the Reds, actually to take a very reformist social democratic path, and basically to keep the bankers in power. And that's the whole history of the left in Western Europe. So the fact that bankers would think that if there's like a fake left movement in Greece that's talking to the people about one thing, but they're actually, if you look at their program and the promises they've made to Europe are something else, well, I think Europeans would feel, and I'm talking about the power elite in Europe, would feel safe trusting that Syriza is playing their game.
Yeah. Anyway, it's just complicated if you start talking double and triple agents. Do you have any thoughts on Golden Dawn, the right-wing party, and why it was smashed? They put a couple of leaders in jail and all that.
Well, that's a complex question. I mean, in simple terms, the specter of fascism, I'm not talking about fascism, but the specter of fascism is used as a boogeyman to scare anyone who is not a fascist to voting for the party which creates the most fear about fascism. So if the real issues are, look, let's face it, there's been, right-wing dictatorships in Europe and Latin America, say, who were being totally controlled by Anglo-Dutch American banking institutions. And the way they kept the people in line was by talking about a communist threat. And there is a left-wing version of that where society can be a social democracy, so to speak, and have, Western-style free elections, right? And that whole mockery of the process. And the way to keep people in line is by having a few incidents, maybe a bombing, and blaming fascists and say, if you don't, you may want something more radical in terms of the curtailing the powers of big business or the state. But look, if you don't vote for us, the fascists are going to take power. And that's what they've done.
Well, they always do that. They always have. I mean,
they always do that. Right. I mean, I know it's obvious to say, but we're talking about it. And I mean, that's how I would describe the way they've marginalized Golden Dawn. The thing is that Golden Dawn has gone through I speak about things objectively. I'm not going to start, pounding the table and talk about the threat of this or these are bad. People are people. They're, human beings. And if someone wants to attack me for humanizing humans, then, they know where they can go. All these people are human beings. And, no one in Golden Dawn is some big banker. And these people are primarily idealists. They've had actually a hard time struggling with pragmatism. And the last 4 or 5 years, they've made a lot of big changes to become more pragmatic. They have received guidance from the outside and consultation, and they have changed a lot of their platform. They've become more popular in doing so. They've moderated their position on the things that were, say, focused more on ethnic and racial issues, and they have improved their position on economic policy. They're only one of two parties in Greece that actually says that Greek gold should be owned by Greeks. The radical idea that things in Greece belong to Greeks. And they're also one of the only two parties, the other being the Communist Party, not Syriza, but the KKE, who says that in fact that the central bank should be a public utility, which is publicly owned, where it's accountable to the public and it's printing a sovereign currency. These are revolutionary ideas for Greece. They're also the most sane and moderate, rational ideas for Greece. And that the KKE on the far left and the Golden Dawn on the far right really kind of form a horseshoe or a circle spectrum. And if you actually analyze the economic platform of the KKE and the Golden Dawn, there are no differences. It's just so strange, Paul, because I mean it's like the Marxists on the left historically, or what they're supposed to say is that the economics, they're supposed to say it's the economy, stupid. They're supposed to say that the economics drives the whole thing, and things like aesthetics and culture and the language of politics and the arts and sexual politics and gender and all this are superstructural phenomenon which change and move in as a result of changes at the base of material economic function. This is the determinism, Marxist determinism.
It's Marxist determinism. Mm-hmm.
Yes, right. But it's these Marxists themselves that are saying, oh no, the fact that the Golden Dawn has a radical left platform doesn't matter because they're wrong on gender, they're wrong on immigration. I mean, that's basically, I think, the only two things that they can really say they're wrong on. And that I think that the average person would agree that, they're wrong on, or not. Their view on immigration is probably more popular than the Syriza's view on immigration. And, so the government that formed really actually, what's interesting is that even though people were looking at Syriza and Golden Dawn, the Russians were saying for the last 3 years that a new government in Greece would be formed, likely from Syriza and Golden Dawn. And a lot of work was done in that direction. A lot of work was done to derail the possibility of Golden Dawn having any credibility. There was a murder that was possibly staged. And then, of course, the state cracked down on Golden Dawn, trumped up charges. I mean, I'm just speaking objectively here.
No, I'm with you. That's why I'm asking. I'm not even taking a stand on it. I'm just saying it looks pretty obvious that at the highest levels, the decision was made to, take them down.
Yeah, the decision was made to take them down because, you see, the thinking was that you have to look at the polls of the last, 8 elections or so in the past 4 or 5 years. And Golden Dawn was on the rise. There was a snap poll, unofficial poll taken, or there was a matrix that was drawn out based on local elections in 2012 or the beginning of 2013, summer of 2012, that found that should there be an election tomorrow, this was like August 15, 2012, that should there be an election tomorrow, that Golden Dawn would receive 19% of the vote, which would mean that there could be no government that could form in Greece without them playing, the second leading role. Today, Golden Dawn is the 3rd largest party in Greece. They were definitely defrauded, robbed of more of votes that they should have had. Their leaders were put in prison. The state put them under investigation, under totally fabricated pretenses, and they therefore couldn't receive the money from the public expenditure on campaign funding. So, they got almost 7% of the vote purely from, or maybe 8%. Of course, there's always then how they count the votes is always irregular. Who knows how many Golden Dawn ballots were lost last week at polls, right? But, even at 6%, that means that 1 out of 19 people in Greece voted for Golden Dawn. And the thinking 3 years ago was that Syriza would surpass PASOK, and they would surpass New Democracy, but that they wouldn't have more than 25 or 26% of the vote, and they would need the other 15% of the vote that Golden Dawn would have in order to make an anti-EU, anti-Troika government. Everyone said, the Russians said this, the Eurasianists actually in particular were saying this. They're probably the only ones in the world at the time 3 years ago that were looking past the left-right paradigm and could imagine that a government could be made from a far left and far right party together with similar economic views. And even though,
Joaquin, yes. If I can interrupt here, I would like to point out before I forget, Syriza needed a coalition partner. They barely got under 50% in the parliament, and they chose, a party on the right, supposedly, that's kind of anti-EU, right?
Yeah. Well, I was getting there. That's basically what I'm saying, is that the Russians basically called this election. The difference is the sort of X factor was that Syriza performed better than had been expected by about, they did about 30% better than had been expected. They were projected to hit like 25%, and this is when the plans were being made and whatever networks were being built around a turnaround for Greece. And they hit closer to 35%, but that still put them at 149 seats, and they needed 151, something like that, to not need to form a coalition government. So they only needed a few more seats. So because they did so much better than expected, and because Golden Dawn was successfully marginalized, and there was no then way that a credible government could make government with Golden Dawn. That was an attempt on one level to derail, basically, what we talked about so far was what are the things that the European elites thought that Syriza would be safe. And it's not just, what Syriza wants, but how you can control them by them not having a mandate or by them having to make a coalition with a party that Europe even has more control over, say like PASOK or New Democracy. So when basically Syriza did so much better than expected, then they could go with to make a coalition with a party that only got like 4% of 3.8, 4.1% of the vote. That's Anel. Anel's platform is really similar to Golden Dawn. Anel almost has the same views on almost most everything as Golden Dawn. They have a different aesthetic approach. They look cleaner. They didn't get bad press. People don't know that much about them. So Syriza was able to make almost exactly that Eurasian prediction government from 3 years ago. They were almost able basically to make that same formation, except instead of with Golden Dawn, they used Anel. Anel has almost the same platform as Golden Dawn, but they don't have that, image of being a mass, they don't
harder
go
edge
for
or whatever.
Yeah, but that's all just, bells and whistles and aesthetics and stuff. I mean, they don't appeal, the guys in Anel, you're not going to see them like, waving, the big black meander standard on a red flag, wearing all black and leading torch lit rallies at night. I mean, Anel, they have the same views pretty much as Golden Dawn on most everything, but they just, their marketing, they look kind of like a center-right party.
Do these,
sure.
the left-right divide, do they even mean anything anymore, Joaquin? I mean, basically what you're saying, like the people view Golden Dawn as a far-right party, and they view Syriza as a far-left party, but as you said, like most of the views are almost identical. So does left-right, does it even mean anything anymore?
You know what? It depends on who, I can't speak for people I don't represent or anything, but my observation is that in my intuition, my experience in politics and organizing tells me that for the broad masses of people who have, lost their mortgages or have seen their rents and their taxes go up, the prices at the market have gone up, they don't give a darn, if, so long as whoever gets the job done, and people pretty much identify the Troika and the ECB as the problem. I mean, the economic and political literacy of the average Greek has gone through the roof. I mean, Greeks get this. They know the problem. And the left-right thing is people don't really care. I'll tell you who does care, though, is the problem has been, basically you have the hardcore on the far right they're stuck in the past. And I'm talking about the ones who show up to every demonstration that Anel or Golden Dawn throws, the ones who you see, at every march waving the meander standard. Those people are convinced that the world is like a Jewish Bolshevik communist conspiracy, and they see the left as the radical left, the communists, as being a problem. They think that the ECB and the Troika are they think everyone is, everything is a communist. They're kind of like the McCarthyists of Europe, of Greece, and that they're paranoid about that, and that keeps the left-right divide going. Then you've got these really, detached, champagne socialists of the dwindling middle class, university professors, people in their 50s and 60s and 70s who are living in the past. They think that it's 1968. They think it's May of 1968, and they think that, they think that we can have like, some other kind of thing. And I don't want to get into that, but I mean, it's sort of like their vision, they are romantically idealizing the people, but not the people as they really are, but some conception in their head of the people the people being a left-wing mass that believes in the same things that they believe in, and but they lost the plot. They lost the plot when they thought that transgendered whatever bathrooms were more important than things like wage and hour and inflation. So that's basically what happened, but for the average, so you have basically for the hardcore hooligan on the far right, he thinks everything bad is communists. And then for the, university professors and, the kids who have the privilege to attend university and don't have to worry about income, they think that social democracy and the present order, as bad as it may be, is better than fascism, right? So that specter of fascism keeps them supporting the status quo. But this is maybe 10 to 15% of the population altogether, and I would say the broad 60 to 85% of the population is like, to hell with the left-right divide. And they don't care about that. It's all, they're politically active, and they'll vote for whoever has the answers and stuff like that. It's not just Greece, Jerry. I mean, we saw, goodness, 15 years ago in France, we had very exciting elections where the National Front and the Trotskyists were leading the polls. I mean, in 2000 or 2002, something like this, in France, you had 6 million people vote for the Trotskyists, and the other 5 or 10 million voted for the National Front. And I think that people are way more on the extremes. I think the average voter is way more on the so-called extremities of the spectrum, which may be more alike than not. And there's just a few people who are in the center, and they dominate the discourse on TV and radio.
I would say I like that term, champagne socialist. I think over here, most people tend to view the socialists as sort of having lost their way or lost their religion. And from my perspective, it seems like the people that usually support the far left parties, for whatever reason, tend to be the wealthy silver spoon type kids, and those that support the more fascistic type parties tend to be the poorer, lower class kids.
Yeah, that's accurate. And the only proviso to that would be the workers who are struggling but who are still employed and are organized in trade unions, they can vote either way. But they would be voting Syriza, let's say in Greece. They'd be voting Syriza, but they would really, in their hearts, be thinking KKE. Or they're voting Syriza, they know it's good for the union and for their job, but they might personally feel that, every immigrant who lives in Greece is one less Greek who has a job. And it's very different in Greece. And it's, Greece is not an imperialist country. It's not a first world country. They haven't had a colony in Greece in 2,000 years. Excuse me, a colony in Africa in 2,000 years. They haven't been a world power. If you consider the Byzantines Greece, then you might say that they haven't been a power since, I don't know, the early 15th century. You can't blame Greek capitalism or Greek parasitism for problems in the world. What I mean by this is, for example, when there are far right elements in Germany who are Islamophobic or who are having problems, there's an argument that I'm not saying is totally coherent, but an argument can be made. Well, look, German investments in Turkey have produced situations in Turkey where there's people are looking to leave Turkey because of German interfering. Or you can look at the French in Algeria or the French in Morocco. So when you have all these Moroccans and Algerians in France, people can say, well, look, this is a result. This is sort of like karma. I'm not saying these are good arguments, but there's something to them. Greece, you can't say that. And Greece hasn't done anything to anybody. And yet the EU has forced Greece to have practically an open door policy on immigration and have taken in people who have no interest in being Greek. And you can't have open door immigration in a country that has more than 4% or 5% unemployment without starting to get a little bit of resentment. And they've got, probably 40 or 50% unemployment. It's crazy that they could even have one immigrant come to Greece in a country that can't take care of Greeks. And I think that's something that the left has completely lost the plot on. And that's why people are looking for a left-wing economic platform, but has what might be considered a right-wing view on immigration.
Yeah, the immigration situation there is absolutely insane. But on another note, I was wondering, do you think and maybe you could just kind of break it down a bit, but do you think there is sort of like a spiritual, philosophical connection between Greece and Russia?
There is. I mean, they're both, have a strong background, Hellenic influence, of course, and Byzantine. Russia was brought to Christianity by the Greeks, and of course the Christianity in Russia is Orthodox, which is Greek. The Cyrillic language of Russia originates in Thessalonica in Greece. So others might say that that's Macedonia, but by Cyril and Methodius, who were monks who developed the Cyrillic language in the 9th century AD. And the Russian history as being a Christian country, and as being part, and also, of course, their exposure to the literature of the Greeks, the poetry and the philosophy is entirely in the Greek as opposed to the Latin or Roman tradition. And they have a strong affinity still. I think that after the fall of the Soviet Union, that this affinity grew, as the churches in Russia were more free to build fraternal relations with Orthodox churches in the world, including Greece. And the Greeks don't see themselves as being Slavs, but just to the north of Greece, everyone is a Slav, and there's a question of ethnogenesis, and if in fact Greeks are a type of South Slav. Of course, Macedonians in the former Yugoslavian Republic of Macedonia are split on the question of their identity. In the north, they see themselves as being Slavs. Many see themselves as being Serbs or Serbo-Macedonians, and in the south, they see themselves as being, Macedonian and Greek, in Greek Macedonian, or just Macedonian, which is kind of like Greek. So it's, the ethnic identity, Greeks are not Slavs and they're not Turks, but in a way that's similar to a Yugoslav. It's just all, labels and terms, but at the same time, the Greeks do see themselves with a much greater affinity to the Slavic world, by way of Orthodoxy and by way of the Byzantine experience. And majority of Greeks favor stronger ties with Russia. The majority of Greeks polled. This is why this was a mandate that Syriza was just elected on. They oppose the Kiev junta. They support the rebels in Novorossiya. They oppose the sanctions on Russia from the EU. This is the broad sentiment of most. And the interesting thing is that this is a view that's shared on the left and on the right. So the Golden Dawn is pro-Russian, geostrategically and culturally, for the reasons we just said. But also the KKE and the left and Syriza voters are also fairly sympathetic to Russia. And they see this through an anti-imperialist, counter-hegemonic, and multipolar lens, being more materialists and oriented that way. But they all agree. They're generally supportive of the proposal to bring the Turkish Russian-Turkish pipeline through Greece. That's going to be a major, major development in energy markets and its effect on politics and economics in Greece. So I think it's fairly safe to say that Greeks are pro-Russian.
I think that's putting it mildly. I think they're very pro-Russian. Speaking of what do you think Russia might do? Do you think they're going to offer aid and money and such to Greece if Greece defaults?
Yeah, they will. They already have. Russia started offering money 4 years ago, and it offered to rebuild Greece, years ago. When the crisis began, practically Russia was in the position, and they have offered to restructure the debt, and it's like you can look at the raw figures, and is it 30 billion, 50 billion, but these are all basically zeros on a computer screen, and there's many because other deals can be made. For example, if another major country like say China or Russia is going to assume responsibility for your debt, well, I mean, they don't actually have to pay cash for your debt because they can sell things that can be monetized, and so they might on paper have a lower value than the zeros on the computer screen would otherwise belie, but they could or indicate. But they could exchange assets that can be monetized and would actually have a higher exchange value or investment value down the line. So there's so many different ways that they could work it out. It's not like Russia would have to fork over 30 or 40 billion to bail out Greece. It could be the way that Russia and Turkey build the gas line through Europe and the kind of discounts. I mean, they might decrease the price from like 370 per unit to 250 or something like that, and that would be worth more over 10 years than the repayment of the 50 billion.
Right. Well, there's another angle in this. Cyprus, the Greek part of Cyprus, might be worth a lot. There seems to be a lot of gas in the Mediterranean. Maybe pipelines would be coming from Cyprus into Turkey, into Europe. I mean, there's some other angles here.
Yeah, it's
and I think there's that. I mean, for geostrategic types, a super important British base in Cyprus.
Yeah.
So
the British Israeli base, right?
So, just little things to think about, not that anybody wants to do any spying in the Mediterranean, but but that's another angle. Well, there are a lot of things there to think about. Maybe since we're talking about Russia, maybe we could kind of get over to the other topic that's hot and heavy these days, which is the war in the Ukraine is back on the last couple of weeks.
It is. That is a big thing. Obviously, it is. It has really flipped over. Let me just real quick though, on the issue of Greece, I want to just plug really fast that my article. If listeners care to read more on the subject of Greece that we just discussed, I recently wrote an article, and I don't know if you want to put it in the description. I'll give a link.
Sure, that was a great article. Mm-hmm.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's on Global Research. It's just by Joaquin Flores articles. You will see it's the article on Syriza. I submitted them the title, but they retitled it. So, they called it something else. They called it, let's see here. They called it Greece, Meaningful Economic Reforms Could Come Through BRICS and Russia, ? And it's just about the election and everything we've talked about. It's about 5,000 words, and we talk about all the things that we did in greater detail. It's on Global Research and Fort Roos and Oriental Review. And, sorry, there it is.
Okay. Well, anyway, I recommend that article, and people should check it out. But then moving on to the Ukraine. The war has started. the last couple of weeks. It's been a fairly one-sided thing.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
do you say? What do you think? What's happening?
Oh, what I love about talking with you on this show is that now we are an hour deep, and I can really tell the truth about what's really going on because, uh, if I'm going to write something that's going to be have spotlights on it, I love that this is like now buried into the second half because I think most of your readers and listeners are, hardcore, and that's going to be great because we have
Okay,
so
what
much
you're
to
saying,
say.
Joaquin, is you can say the truth.
What I'm saying is
Okay,
I can say the truth.
Okay, so let's go for it.
Okay.
Let's get
Look.
this no chasers stuff here.
Yeah. Okay. Look, first thing is, I observe these things and, it fits the model. As you and your listeners know, we've been saying on your show from the start, I broke the story that Poroshenko was going to, lose power and the Pravi sector would have some kind of coup, and that this is a U.S. plot to destabilize. And at first, it seemed credible, of course, and there was signs that this could happen, and I think other analysts and stuff saw after we said that, other analysts saw that, and since that time, in the past few weeks, now we've had the chairman of Novorossiya Parliament, who's a former Party of Regions parliamentarian and chairperson of the local party, Oleg Zarev, who now has gone over to the side of the rebels since April or June. Oleg Zarev, he's basically the president of the parliament of the federal state of Novorossiya. So even though he doesn't get a lot of the same focus because he's not a general like Zakharchenko, he's actually has more authority on many things than either the presidents of the DPR or LPR, and so he's major. Oleg Zarev has said that he thinks Pravi sector is going to make a coup next month, and as well as a number of other analysts. I think that this view is becoming the predominant view now among all analysts and political actors in and around Novorossiya. I think Ishenko has also echoed my view on that. I don't think that this is because it's anything that anyone read that I wrote, but rather what I described is among experts a known process, a known strategy, and I think that I was just ahead of the curve, 6 months ago, and described the process unfolding, and I was tapped into how the Russians were gaming it and how the U.S. was gaming it, and I easily could have been wrong, but it looks like unfortunately I could be right, and that's not a good thing. It's nothing to be happy about, but it does mean that things I say about it might have more credibility. So moving forward.
You were talking about it a while ago. I guess the immediate thing is, I mean, we're coming up on the first anniversary of the coup.
Yeah.
Right. And so that would be a time where there'd be all kinds of marches and anniversaries and all that. And at the same time, the Ukrainian army is not doing well at all in the war, right?
No, it's not. It's not. It was 1 year ago, almost to the day, that I gave a YouTube podcast or interview saying that the Pravi sector are the Wahhabis of the Ukrainian Spring. And now we've seen it unfold, and it's really, really just similar to the model used in Libya and in Syria. And you would think that a year out that there'd be, jubilation, and they'd be celebrating the new lack of a constitution or whatever they have, and
celebrate the lack of a constitution. Anti-Constitution Day.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, and celebrate the rule of oligarchs and stuff. And but yeah, I was saying things that were like people. I was attacked. I was called an apologist for the Kiev junta because I said that Poroshenko was a pliable figure, that he was a moderating figure, that he was holding the glue together of the last threads of civil society. I said that he was not an ideologue. I said that he was an opportunist, and I said that the Russians were analyzing him psychologically. They had conducted a profile on him. I did not know what the results of that profile were, but we could judge based upon some of the maneuvers of the foreign minister, of Lavrov, his statements and his interactions with Poroshenko and his colleague on the same level on the Ukrainian side, the results of the Minsk meeting, how that was being delegated, how that was being enforced, the agreements that were being made, the continuation of the sale of Donbas coal to Ukraine. They kept the gas on. Russia had done everything possible to keep Poroshenko afloat, to keep the other oblasts that are not Novorossiya together as a single Ukrainian state. They did not push into Mariupol. They did not embarrass the Ukrainian army. They more or less stuck to the borders that were discussed in Minsk on September 5 of last year. While hostilities didn't exactly ever go away, there was always exchanges of fire and movements of troops, reinforcement of supply lines, which is not the definition of a ceasefire at all whatsoever. Nevertheless, the Russians could have busted through. They did not embarrass Poroshenko. They did not discredit his leadership. And we saw this even mirrored. Oleg Sarev, who we've just discussed, chairman of Novorossiya Parliament, effectively the president of Novorossiya, he has said recently that Poroshenko is not responsible for the events on Maidan, that he was not part of the coup, that in fact he was even riding one of the police tractors against the coup, and he was actually at that time working with, if I can even say it, Yanukovych to mitigate the situation, and was calling for support at the time he was not on the same page with Yatsenyuk and Turchinov. Poroshenko was brought in later, and he was seen as, in fact, a unifier. And even though he was not loved at all in the east of the country, who did not participate very broadly at all in the elections a year ago, May, for Kiev junta, he was the one who won. He formed a weak coalition, but he did win the election, and he was voted on. And the Russians did attempt to help legitimize his election. And even now, recently, Oleg Zarev has said that he doesn't have the blood of Maidan on his hands. So there's been all kinds of things that, really fit into the model that we've described, I think, very thoroughly in my 5 or 6 reports, 200-something pages, reference footnotes on the subject of the coup tactic and the evolution of the process in Ukraine.
So this kind of brings up the question of where it may be going now, though. There could be a coup. Do you think it's heading into the failed state, warlords kind of situation, or where do you see it going?
It is unofficial. I do believe that we have already arrived there, it is that the situation is that really the central authority is really not there. They already have lost control. Several oblasts are no longer in control of central government. They don't actually have any coherent chain of command. This also helps to explain a lot of the losses. By the way, also in the fighting with the rebels, the Novorossiyan rebels, there's also, as we've said, already been exchange of fire, several incidents between Pravi sector militias and the Ukrainian government. in my September report, I forecasted that even in the event that Poroshenko and government in Kiev remains on paper, that they wouldn't exercise actual control. They would have been de facto overthrown, even if not de jure, and that they would not be issuing military orders, and that they might be the public interface with the West in a failed state situation, but no, in fact, you have Kolomoisky is making a grab at some type of power, but it's really not that. But he's making it look like that. He has tremendous influence over Dnieper 1, Aidar, Azov. He has his own private militia as well. That's like a private security that doesn't have any pretense of being ideological, but he also has significant control over 3 of the ideological militias. And, he can push on them. And also in Kiev, you have Yarosh saying that they are organizing to overthrow the government. You have already battalion leaders saying of the Pravi sector battalions that they've been completely betrayed. That the lustration process, which is the process of straining out all of the post-Soviet leadership, basically, they call that lustration. That the lustration process was not complete. That that the nominally pro-European people in the Rada and the ministerial positions are actually crypto-communists. This is like the language and the ideology of the Pravi sector. It's ludicrous, but this is how they see things. And it's everyone is saying it now. I mean, it's basically you have mass defections. You have Ukrainian army wants in certain places to join the rebels in Novorossiya. They want to create an indigenous movement in their own oblasts. They want to basically march on Kiev. So you have basically this idea of different types of Ukrainians. As far as the Novorossiyans, you have Ukropians, who are these brainwashed criminals and far-right extremists who have identity crisis of being Slavs who hate Slavs and who hate Russians, and then there are Ukrainians who see themselves as Ukrainian, not as Russian, but see themselves as being part of a big family that includes Russians, and want to overthrow Poroshenko, not because he betrayed the Pravi sector, but because he's a tool of the Atlanticists. So you have the stage is not only set for a civil war, but you already have it basically unfolding. I mean, the first rounds have already been fired between different elements of the Ukrainian side. They've already started to turn on each other in a serious way. On the media level, the Kiev Post has turned against Poroshenko, and the Kiev Post, which is an organ of the Atlanticists, right. Things that they published that were pro-Maidan were critical in getting local Ukrainian support for Maidan. The NGOs that are backed by the U.S. There was some 100 different NGOs, which each had upwards of 1,000 employees and activists involved with them that were involved in Maidan, which means that when you saw 100,000 people at Maidan Square, all of them were a mixture of employees of U.S. NGOs and the volunteer activists that had been recruited, probably a ratio of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. And yes.
So I've got a question about this. You brought up Kolomoisky and his huge army.
Mm-hmm.
And of course most of them are, strongly like anti-Russian.
Yeah.
And I have a question. how many of them are anti-Jewish? And I mean, it's not a topic that's, exciting, but first of all, Kolomoisky himself is a very important Jewish figure in Europe.
Yes.
I forget the figures. He built the largest synagogue in Europe in his town. I think he's
Yes.
one of the leaders of the World Jewish Congress at times. I mean, he's an important figure. And so, first of all, if some of these right-wing groups are also anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish, then why don't they go after their own boss?
Yeah,
But
because they don't believe it. They don't believe it.
Because it's BS, right? Of course.
Yeah, they're just saying, oh, this is Russian communist propaganda. It's just like, look, I mean, how easy is it to show that the people financing and aiding al-Nusra or ISIS are coming out of Saudi Arabia and Israel and the U.S.? I mean, how many of those Wahhabis would believe? They'd be like, oh my God, come on, this is,
Hey,
this
Joaquin,
is Satan's propaganda.
I'm hoping to live long enough to see Al-Qaeda attack Israel. Because I figure I'm going to live to a very ripe old age. But anyway, now from that, then I got one angle from this, and a lot of people I think will be interested in. There's talk, and if the Ukraine goes into the failed state warlord kind of thing, that Kolomoisky wants to create essentially a Khazar kingdom, his own little country. Do you see any thoughts on that, first of all?
One
it's
thing
totally
about
speculative, but I just think some people are talking about it, writing about it.
No, it's a good question. Look, it's possible. Look, Kolomoisky is like, he has what, 3 or 4 billion, as opposed to Akhmetov's 15 billion. He's what, the third or fourth wealthiest man in Ukraine, or the former Ukraine. He, I don't really think that he thinks that he can make an even smaller state out of the 3 or 4 oblasts that he could use his militias to control. I mean, he's not a stupid man. He knows numbers. He can see that the areas that he controls are actually welfare recipients on the federal level. And basically, in the best case scenario, he could monetize and sell off the remaining assets, which would be what, land and organs,
slaves, sexual slaves.
Yeah, I mean, that's all in the works, I suppose. I think that it's just more probable that his liquid capital is primarily invested not in Ukraine but in Europe. What happens to Ukraine is not that important to him. But yeah, there is this sort of, remote or not so remote possibility that as if the Israel Zionist project fails, that, 500,000 or 1 million Israelis that are of Russian Ukrainian descent might repatriate themselves to some Ukrainian Khaganate.
Can I throw in
Please.
a wild bit of speculation?
Yeah.
Some would say that certain Zionistic types have an element of revenge in their ideology. Mm-hmm. And if Ukraine was where the original Khazar kingdom was in the year 800 AD or whatever that got smashed, maybe the goal isn't so much to move back there, it's just to destroy everything.
Yeah,
kind of a revenge project. Total wild speculation that everyone can ignore, but just a thought that
yes.
Not everybody's motivated by profit. Some people are motivated by revenge.
There's a lot of motivations. Yeah, that could be a motivating factor for any of the Zionist or Jewish oligarchs that are interfering. There are many presently in the Ukrainian government, Jewish people are really overrepresented statistically in comparison to the percentage of the population. 25% of the government is foreign, which is really strange, and it's been pointed out, and it's not lost on the private sector people either. But yeah, at root, private sector people who are really ideological, they don't believe that Jewish oligarchs are pulling the strings on the neo-Nazi brigades. It seems totally impossible because they're Nazis and they're against Jews, and I mean they just they're not geniuses or even very intelligent. They're a lot of stupid people, quite frankly. I mean, you have a lot of 80, 90 IQ people up in there, and they see black and white. And also, the thing to remember is that very similar to Wahhabism, which is like Islamofascism, that there's a certain, I'm not talking about like theory of fascism, like Giovanni Gentile or, Julius Evola or, Junger. I'm not talking about anything philosophical. There's a type of fascism which is based in reducing the number of words in the vocabulary, reducing the number of possible concepts, and seeing the world in black and white, and using a lot of thought-terminating phrases and language, and also being aggressive and verbally abusive in conversations with others, so that you are agreeing not with the logic, but with the threat of the violence coming from the speaker, who's using thought-terminating language, simple one line, a deprived or starved vocabulary. So they don't actually even have the language or the conceptual framework to explain how it's possible that Jewish oligarchs are controlling Nazis.
Joaquin, if I could take the conversation a little bit different direction. If this does fall apart and if things do start getting worse, which obviously I think they are, what are the odds that we're going to see some type of false flag? I know there's been speculation that Kolomoisky might blow up a dam if the NAF forces push into Odessa. And also, we've heard a couple reports of missiles that kind of magically blew up en route to Novorossiya. What are your thoughts on those two perspectives?
Yeah, the magical missile blowing up, obviously, people got ahead of the curve and blew them up. It's like you really have to see that Poroshenko was just trying to hang on, and look, in the purely objective terms, he's like a sociopath. I mean, we're not talking about any humanitarian angle here at all. There's no humanitarian angle here. It's simply just pragmatic and stuff. I think it's difficult to answer, Jerry. I don't know if you want to like phrase the question differently.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is you can look at it from a couple different angles. The first angle would be if the Kiev junta is starting to things are starting to go really bad. Are they going to stage a false flag or do some huge provocation, blame it on Novorossiya, and then use that as a justification to bring in NATO or whatever type of scenario?
Yeah, they've tried that. They've tried this, and it's what it is. So there are things called tests. There's tests, and the U.S. Really can't commit its own. It really wants to destroy Ukraine. Maybe this lines up with what Paul suggested about a form of Zionist revenge on Ukraine. But there's really a lot of outside of history and religious. There's as we've explained on previous shows, there's a geostrategic reason for Ukraine to be a failed state. This means that the U.S. did not really want to like back the Ukrainian military so that it could actually win in Novorossiya and put down the rebellion. So likewise, then you have just imagine a conversation, right? So, basically you have a Russian agent who's having a conversation with someone trusted by Poroshenko or with Poroshenko himself. And they're trying to basically, this is all about a process of people feeling each other out. So, because people can say one thing and you can make a commitment, but this whole process is filled with intrigue and backstabbing and double agents and stuff. And so if the U.S. has been telling Ukraine, let's say Yatsenyuk, we've got your back. If things escalate, then we can escalate. If you do this, then NATO will escalate. And, so they give certain signs like, look, we've deployed more troops, or look, we've got the Polish foreign minister to say something that backs you. Then they feel, okay, it is. They were basically trying to basically create the Ukrainian government actually believed by and large that they could create a stable Ukraine, that if they could put down the rebellion, then they could create this Intermaria confederation, the Black Sea to the Baltic interdevelopment zone, that they would get, 15 billion plus another 15 billion. When Soros came out and urged 50 billion, they said, oh, Soros is an authority. He's got swag. He's got a lot of pull. If Soros is saying 50 billion, if the IMF is saying that the conditions of more funds is going to be from the cessation of the fighting, well, if we win the war, the fighting will stop. So they put these feelers out to see what they get if they do different things. Imagine the Russian agents and the Russian foreign minister in behind the doors talks are telling Poroshenko or even Yatsenyuk, look, bro, if it's true, then do a test and see what they do. I mean, there's only so many things that one can do, and there's only so many ways of calling their bluff. So do a false flag, see if they back you up. So they've done 2 or 3 false flags already, and nada. And also Europe, despite its talk of this and that, has not crossed certain lines. Sanctions on Russia could be worse. They have not authorized any increase of a military, solution. Europe has maintained the solution on Europe will be political, economic. Europe has taken military off the table. That rules out a formal NATO action in Ukraine. So it's all about, 500 million here, $1 billion there to back a failing military campaign. So another
Joaquin,
false flag, no way.
Joaquin, do you smell a rat?
They must be feeling at the higher levels. They must start to feel the betrayal now, and you wonder if maybe they're putting out feelers to Saakashvili to see if he's got any room on his spare couch.
They want to know they hate Saakashvili right now, to be honest, because the U.S. Was much kinder to Saakashvili than they were to Poroshenko or even Yatsenyuk, and it's like they're actually, the government in Ukraine is trying to figure out if they can come stay with Lavrov.
I think they want to avoid mobilization, is what you're saying. They want to join the 2 million Ukrainians who fled to Russia to avoid the draft.
Yep.
A lot of members of the Ukrainian parliament want to know if they can join to avoid the fallout.
You know what? They actually were laughing about it, but in fact, Oleg Zarev, because he maintains open dialogue and knows people in the Rada, he reported that people are leaving Ukraine. that government members are going into hiding already. As we've already said, several oblasts in the southwest and are not in control, and southeast rather, are not in control of the central authority. We already have many reports of betrayal. The Kiev junta has been shelling positions of the Pravi sector militias out in the field. They've actually perhaps coordinated a few attacks on Pravi sector with Russian rebels. For example, the leader of the Ghost Battalion has been the most vocal, talking about unifying with Ukrainians, getting Ukrainians. Like I've said, they've created now two distinct identities of Ukropians and Ukrainians, and they want to join with Ukrainians against the Ukropians. And, it's Viktor Mushenko, the crazy guy, military chief he's the one who has said that Russia has invaded about 15 times now. He's come forward publicly and said that there are no Russian troops in Ukraine because he's working with Poroshenko to maintain Poroshenko's legitimacy. Somehow he thinks that it would, or they've decided that, because they're trying to really mitigate or downplay the threat of the rebellion in the east, because Poroshenko's on his last threads. I mean, the things are just going actually as we forecasted. Yadosh is saying he's going to dig in deeper to develop the parallel institutions, organs of dual power. I know I keep up as well with the statements by Pravi Sector Information Minister, and she has said that it's a wise move. She's the primary interface with the European supporters of Pravi Sector. She's endorsed the move by Yadosh to launch a SS-style military organization as a parallel organization. Kolomoisky and oligarchs, many of them Jewish too, incidentally. Whether that's meaningful or not, I'll leave that to listeners to decide. But they are for this. Poroshenko is now he's blaming the Heavenly 100 deaths on the Maidan organizers. Poroshenko is coming out and saying even possibly that they were snipers that killed people at Maidan that were not the Berkut. He might want to bring back Berkut. I mean, the whole thing is just so bizarre because by Berkut we know that that's like Russian police security is the truth. I can say on the show, Berkut was always a FSB infiltrated security organization in Ukraine for crowd control and police, paramilitary police. So, that's the real dirt, my friend.
Do you think that the NAF forces, and maybe, I don't know, we shouldn't even go there, and I know you don't like to speculate, but do you think that they're going to press into Mariupol and Kharkov?
I think that ultimately, yes. To answer the question, yes. And then to give kind of how that breaks down is, in fact, there will be a series of kidnappings and assassinations in Kharkov and Mariupol against the targets will be leaders of Pravi sector. This will create disarray and disorder in the organization. Then these will be from Novorossiyan special ops. There will be kidnappings, assassinations. There will be a barracks or house that Pravi sector lives in will be blown up. there will be a lot of fear struck in the hearts of militia stationed in Mariupol and in Kharkov. That will be the initial stage in terms of coercive force. On the grassroots level, this will create the political space for there to be a coup in the police and security. There will be infiltration of the police and security in Mariupol and Kharkov by pro-Russian elements on the intelligence level. Simultaneously, the forces of pro-Russian and the left, trade unions and Communist Party and Party of Regions voters, will stage a people's march against the oligarchs. It will be a popular, peaceful demonstration with banners and bullhorns march through the streets and central squares, both in Kharkov and Mariupol. And this will announce a people's overthrow, covertly penetrating the lines, military lines surrounding Kharkov and Mariupol. Will be infiltration of more paramilitary, pro-Russian paramilitary units, rebels, Novorossians, special ops, Spetsnaz, whatever. And
well, that was pretty specific. I didn't expect that, but all right, we'll take it.
Well, hey, we're on plain truth, and that will then there will be a declaration of a people's revolution. Okay, only after the declaration and a snap poll, a vote, which will be marred by an explosion at a polling booth and violence, which CNN will ambiguously and BBC will ambiguously report was maybe done by pro-Russians, even though it will be a pro-Russian vote marred by violence that will occur within 72 hours or so of the declaration of the people's referendum or whatever, following a public march through the center of town. Only then will you see a very aggressive blitzkrieg type operation from Novorossians that will follow only upon a public declaration of call. You will have basically the declaration of a people's militia in the Kharkov Oblast. It will be peopled by the pre-existing Novorossian elements, but it will appear, at least in the spectacle, in the simulacrum, it will be presented as completely indigenous, meaning from Kharkov Oblast or from Mariupol, respectively, in the south. And that's how I see it going down. It will not be a simple military operation where you can have. They already tested that. The test balloon already went up, and we already saw that if it goes that way, that Ukrainians are going to do a false flag and say the Novorossians did it, and they're going to shell a school. Something like that already happened in Mariupol 2 weeks ago. So we already seen how that script can play out. So they already tested that one, and fortunately, Russian Foreign Ministry was able to deflect that fairly well, because the EU threatened to increase the sanctions. Greece vetoed the increase of sanctions, although Reuters reported somewhat misleadingly that Greece voted to keep the sanctions, which is not entirely inaccurate, but omits the fact that Greece vetoed the increase of sanctions surrounding the Mariupol shelling incident. And so, but we've seen how that test goes. I have been forecasting for the last year, or since last year's summer, that for Kharkov or Mariupol to go over to Novorossiya must take on the spectacle of a people's revolt. And so all of the rest of the details, of course, are just how that fleshes out and the the nuts and bolts.
Okay, then I got a few questions.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Well, first of all, Mariupol is within the geography of the oblast in question, right? So they already had their independence vote or whatever, originally. So what's stopping them now is you got all these Pravi sector types there, right? The military, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the Ukrainian military is losing badly and demoralized and so on, right? So a couple of weeks from now, if the war continues, they won't be able to hold Mariupol, will they?
That's true. That will create the space for a people's revolt. This is just important for how it's presented to the world.
You mean the PR, the simulacrum? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Then moving on, and that makes perfect sense in terms of. I'm just saying that they already had a vote once, but in terms of Kharkov, yeah, definitely they would need some veneer to make it look good. But even setting aside Kharkov, because that's right next to Russia and, really shouldn't be that hard to either win or keep.
Right.
That still leaves the whole question of the rest of the country up in the air. What do you think, what do you think is, what is Russia going to try to do? I mean, ideally, yeah, they want one wonderful family in the Ukraine, but
yeah.
That's going to be hard. I mean, the two rebel republics have been destroyed. The bad blood is going to be tremendous. I mean, if I were from there,
Yes.
I don't know that you can put it together again, is what I'm saying.
Right.
What do you see? If you have any thoughts, what do you see, setting aside what you just said about Kharkov and Mariupol, moving on to the broader picture as we go down months out, what do you see?
I think that there is bad blood, but I think that it can be pieced together in terms of the talking points. There are, it's not a single individual we're talking about who has to ultimately think one way or think another, or even one individual that has mixed feelings. Population in Novorossiya, there are different voices, and right now they're being expressed by different leaders in Novorossiya and also different commanders. And different brigades feel different ways based upon the native composition of the fighters in the unit. If their particular town was shelled, the number of loved ones that they have personally lost due to the shelling or to the death squads that were being launched out of the Donetsk airport at the time before it was lost, and lost by the Ukrainians. And I think that there are different voices and different narratives can be created and recreated. And I think that the development of the distinction between Ukrainians and Ukropians is a major move in the direction of unity, because you can now, you're not just talking about all of them. You're talking about an understanding that the majority of the Ukrainian army felt they didn't have a choice. They were being threatened with between 4 and 7 years military imprisonment if they didn't go. They were scared. They were brainwashed. They're uneducated. And I think that there is even room for sympathy for a lot of the boys in the Ukrainian army who are being sent. And a clear distinction has been made between Pravi sector volunteers, radicals, racists, and misanthropes on the one hand, who are actively agents of the oligarchs and who know that they're killing people, and your average Ukrainian grunt who's conscripted, whose family didn't have the money to pay it off, whose mothers told them, don't go to jail, do your 6 months and be out, and God willing, you'll be safe. And that's what happened. And these boys got sent off, and they were, just set up to do something artillery or something driving trucks, and they didn't really know what they were doing. They were lied to about the operations. They were told, you're using artillery to shell a location that's 30, 40 kilometers, 50 kilometers away. I mean, you can't see that far, and you're not being shown a map and being told where you're shelling. You're just given coordinates, and you plug the coordinates into the, into the cannon, and you fire, and you don't know that you're even hitting a town. And I think that feelings aside, there is enough education and knowledge of that point on the Novorossiyan side that they're not holding, each and every Ukrainian soldier accountable. And I think that there's a lot of room for forgiveness and for putting things back together on that front. But now in terms of, how it's going to play out with, look, this has been a Russian victory in many ways so far. I mean, it's been the U.S. and Europe that's had to spend and spend and spend to keep Ukraine afloat. I think that they thought that Russia would overreact and would come in and try to establish things prematurely before Europe or U.S. had overspent and before the public discourse could really sway in the direction of the Russian view. I think that the Russian view on this is becoming more popular, and I think that it's also the sanctions have been more painful for Europe, and there's been more and more breaks in the ranks on the European side and between the Atlanticist powers than there has been in Russia. I think that Putin is more popular than he's ever been before. I think that the Russian oligarchy, even those invested overseas, have renationalized and have been have actually had to been brought closer into the Russian orbit. So I think that many of the Western plans to break up Russian power and to create disunity and disruption on the Russian end have failed. It's the U.S. that's had to spend. It's Europe that's had to spend in Ukraine. Poroshenko's been caught in the middle. I don't feel sorry for him. I'm not saying he's a poor kid caught in the middle. I'm saying that, the whole plan is FUBAR. And I don't think that Russia needs to move to recognize officially, or that there needs to be something like put to the UN. I mean, you have a similar thing as South Ossetia or Abkhazia. And why does it need recognition? I mean, it exists. I mean, or look at anywhere else in the world. It's, the UN is a failing body. It's increasingly meaningless organization. We don't have a.
I could go along with that. I guess, though, as we're kind of running out of time here, though, to wrap it up, I suppose I would say, if you could, though, do you want to hazard a guess what the Ukraine might look like in a few years? In terms of, just broadly speaking, will it maintain a fiction of being one country based in Kiev? Or what do you think?
That's up to the map makers. I mean, that's going to be up to Google and Rand McNally.
Okay.
Look, it's like if Poroshenko or Yatsenyuk will be around in a couple years, God knows. It's whatever happens won't have anything to do with justice, but it'll just be whether there's a fictional Kiev government, but operationally there's not going to be, unless you have a regime change in Kiev, and that can happen, but that would signal a complete collapse of the U.S. effort to destabilize. So we're really at a crossroads. There's really two visions, and it is best from the Russian perspective to have a strong Donbass, which is part of a Ukraine that exerts tremendous influence on elections in Kiev. You want a strong political machine from the East that's pro-Russian, that turns out to vote, that is the economic power of Ukraine, and that is really controls the body politic in Kiev, not these welfare queens from Lviv and from the west of the country.
Yeah, well, all I'll say on that, though, is I think then Russia should have spent the last 23 years doing things a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And also, with the destruction of the Donbass, I don't think a lot of the people are going to come back anytime soon. And with the Crimea leaving, the numbers are going to be Ukrainian nationalism will be a majority position in national elections.
Now you have the other scenario. So that is really not workable. I don't think you'd even have elections really that mean anything. You would have Kolomoisky's armies, and you would just have a clash of different things. I think you would see in the vacuum of a post-Ukraine. But if the U.S. wanted to then increase its activities, it would destabilize Poland in the south. The real undercurrent of the Pravi sector, talking about the hardcore militants in the west, are really Galicians, and they don't even really see themselves as Ukrainians, and all of this like Slava Ukraina stuff is all, they don't even believe it when they say it. And you would think that they did, because they are Galicians, and they also know that Ukraine is a fiction, and they don't, and they just, on the level of leadership and the hardcore inner party of the Galician nationalists, who are the backbone of Pravi sector in many cases, they see Ukrainian support for Pravi sector as useful idiots. They're like, hey, these are Galicians. They don't see themselves as Slavs. They see themselves as a distinct ethnicity. They have a lot of fictions, a lot of mythology that they're Germans. There's all kinds of just stupidity going on there. And
Yeah.
and if they see Ukrainians killing Ukrainians as a great thing, and if they think that they're like the Hitlerian masterminds that are convincing Ukrainians to kill Russians and other Ukrainians, but they're going to get funded by the CIA and NED and USAID, just like ISIS. And if they want to bring in Poland and to pursue, this is the other vision we're talking about, like if there's a failure to keep a pro-Russian Ukraine together in 2 years. We're looking at trying to draw Hungary to destabilize Hungary, because Hungary has a pro-Russian government. So there's going to be, a color revolution attempt in Hungary. You're going to have if Poland is pro-NATO, nevertheless, doesn't matter. The U.S. doesn't care about its own allies. If it's about creating a failed state or more friction in the region, then they're going to Galicia goes into the whole south of Poland. And in fact, the south of Poland can really all be considered Galicia too. So basically everywhere that's west of Kiev and all the way into the south of Poland is actually Galicia. And they have Pravi sector organizers and cells. They're Galician separatists in the south of Poland, and they're connected by the same networks, politically funded, now covertly, as
So
the
Joaquin,
Pravi sector. Yes, sir.
Joaquin, I think what you're saying is there could be Galician rebels
Yes.
before you know it. It would not be impossible to imagine. And so we could have a war on the other side of Ukraine.
Yes.
Well,
Exactly.
life is full of ironies. But I tell you what, we've gone long enough. We've taken all of your time.
Yes.
So why don't we call it a wrap for today? And thanks so much for coming. Appreciate it.
I'm glad I was here.
And do you want to tell people your website?
Yeah, we have Syncretic Studies, where we are as a think tank, geopolitical public think tank, and we're publishing mostly academic work and reports, and also events from that are anti-imperialist happening in Serbia, as well as analysis of color revolutions. And that is Syncretic Studies. If you Google it, it's the first hit. It's easy to find. It's SYN Cretic Studies. And then, of course, for English language translations from Russian bloggers and news sources, there's Sport Rus, which I'm editor and co-produce. That's Sport Rus. It's probably the fastest growing English language Russian news website. And
shout out to Christina.
Shout out to Christina. She put this together, and her initiative has been very good. She's brought on board some other great translators, and they're putting out, dozens of articles every couple of days. And I think it's surpassing every other English language Russian news site for people who want inside information on the events in Russia and Ukraine. So those are my plugs. And, I think the parting words I would give, if I can, are just, don't believe the hype. Know that what you're seeing is all an illusion, and whatever your first thoughts are, if it's based on believing it, whatever your first thoughts are, just keep in mind that those are manufactured thoughts. They're not really your thoughts. Those are the thoughts that they want you to have, and then so work backwards from there to figure out what's really going on.
Yeah, very good. Okay, that's it, folks. It's a wrap. Bye.